It was a breezy Saturday afternoon, and the sun shone brightly in the sky. Birds chirped in the distance, and the air was filled with the warm scent of blooming flowers. Emily Dawson stepped out of her small, cozy apartment onto the cobblestone streets of her quiet neighborhood. In her hand was the familiar harness of her guide dog, Max, who walked confidently at her side. Emily was blind, but she didn't let that slow her down. She had always believed in living life fully, relying on her other senses and her trusty companion, Max, to guide her through each day. With Max by her side, Emily felt like she could do anything. The bond they shared was unshakable, built on trust, love, and countless adventures together. Max was a large German shepherd with a sleek coat and sharp, intelligent eyes. His steps were steady, his movements calculated and precise. To the people who saw Emily and Max walking down the street, they were just a woman and her dog, a heartwarming, ordinary pair. Some passers-by would smile warmly at them, while others might say, "What a beautiful dog." Emily would often smile and reply, "Yes, he's my best friend." But what no one could see, what no one could possibly guess, was that Max wasn't just any guide dog. Max had a past, a secret life that Emily rarely spoke about. Behind his calm and gentle demeanor was a history so remarkable, so extraordinary, that it seemed like something out of a movie. Max had once been part of something much bigger than guiding Emily down the streets of her neighborhood. Max was a retired presidential guard canine. He had been trained by the best of the best, serving as a protector in the highest levels of government. Max had once stood alert and ready in the halls of power, watching over some of the most important figures in the world. His training had been rigorous, preparing him to detect danger, protect those in his care, and act with swift precision when needed. For years, he had served with unwavering loyalty, guarding presidents, diplomats, and other key officials. Max had faced situations most people couldn't imagine, and he had come out of them stronger and wiser. But now, that life was behind him. After retiring from his role as a guard dog, Max had been paired with Emily through a special program that matched retired service animals with people who needed them. Emily didn't know all the details of Max's past, but she knew enough to understand that he was more than a regular guide dog. She could feel it in the way he moved, always alert and ready. She could sense it in the way he responded to sounds and people, calm, but always watchful. Max's training never left him, even in his quieter life with Emily. As they walked down the street that breezy afternoon, Emily took in the sounds and smells around her. The faint clatter of cups and plates from the nearby cafe, the laughter of children playing in the park, and the rustling of leaves in the gentle wind all painted a vivid picture in her mind. She reached down and gently patted Max's head. "It's a beautiful day, isn't it, Max?" she said softly. Max wagged his tail in response, his ears perking up slightly. His sharp eyes scanned the street ahead, always aware of his surroundings. To him, every walk was more than just a stroll. It was a mission to keep Emily safe. They passed a few people on the sidewalk. An elderly man sitting on a bench tipped his hat and said, "Good afternoon, miss." Emily smiled and replied, "Good afternoon." A group of teenagers rode by on their bikes, their laughter ringing in the air. "Cool dog," one of them shouted, and Emily couldn't help but chuckle. Max gave a small wag of his tail but kept his focus on the path ahead. Though everything seemed peaceful, Max's instincts never let him relax completely. Years of training had taught him to stay alert at all times. He could sense changes in the environment, shifts in people's behavior, and subtle signs of trouble before they became apparent to anyone else. Even now, as Emily enjoyed the breeze and the sounds of her neighborhood, Max's mind was working. He wasn't just guiding her, he was protecting her. To Emily, Max was her world. He was more than a guide dog, he was her partner, her protector, and her best friend. She trusted him completely, knowing that he would never let anything happen to her. What she didn't know was that Max's skills, honed over years of service, were about to be tested once again. As they continued their walk, Emily had no idea that her peaceful day was about to take an unexpected turn. No one did. And certainly, the people they were about to encounter had no clue who or what they were messing with. The peaceful afternoon was suddenly interrupted by the loud roar of motorcycles. Their engines growled like thunder, cutting through the calm sounds of birds chirping and leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. Emily paused, holding tightly onto Max's harness. She couldn't see them, but she could feel the change in the air. Something wasn't right. The sound grew closer, and soon, a group of bikers entered the plaza. There were 5 of them, all dressed in leather jackets with bold, intimidating designs. Their jackets bore logos and slogans, and their loud laughter echoed as they spoke. They weren't just here to enjoy the day, they were here to make a scene. Max stopped abruptly, his body stiffening. He didn't bark or growl, but Emily could sense his alertness. Max had always been a calm and steady dog, but in moments like these, she could feel the shift in his energy. His muscles were tense, his focus sharp. Emily tightened her grip on his harness and whispered, "It's okay, Max. I'm with you." One of the bikers noticed her. He nudged the man next to him and pointed in her direction. "Hey, look at that," he said loudly, drawing the attention of the group. They all turned to stare at Emily and Max. "Hey, lady," one of them shouted. His voice was rough and mocking, full of arrogance. "What are you doing out here all by yourself? Shouldn't you be at home? You know, where it's safe." The others laughed loudly, their voices carrying across the plaza. Emily remained calm, her face steady and unreadable. She had dealt with rude people before, but this felt different. There was an edge to their tone, a sense of entitlement that made her stomach tighten. Another biker stepped forward, his boots clunking heavily on the cobblestone. "What's the matter? Can't see us glaring at you," he sneered. His words were sharp and cruel, designed to sting. The group laughed even louder, feeding off each other's energy. Emily didn't react to their taunts. She knew better than to give them what they wanted. Instead, she gently adjusted her grip on Max's harness, silently telling him to stay calm. She trusted him completely, knowing he would guide her through this moment safely. But Max wasn't just calm, he was ready. His ears perked up, and his sharp eyes locked onto the group. His body remained still, but his stance was firm. He positioned himself protectively in front of Emily, a silent warning to anyone who might try to get closer. The bikers didn't notice Max's subtle movements. They were too busy enjoying their cruel jokes. One of them, a tall man with a scruffy beard, stepped even closer. "What kind of dog is that, huh?" he asked loudly. "Does he even do anything, or is he just for show?" Emily stayed silent, her face calm but her mind racing. She didn't want to escalate the situation, but she also wasn't going to back down. She trusted Max with her life, and she knew he wouldn't let anything happen to her. The scruffy biker leaned closer, peering at Max as if trying to intimidate him. "Bet he's just a big, fluffy pet," he said with a smirk. "Not much use, is he?" Max's tail didn't wag. His eyes stayed locked on the biker, his body tense and ready. Emily could feel the quiet strength radiating from him, a silent promise that he was in control. One of the younger bikers, eager to impress the others, revved his motorcycle engine loudly. The sound roared through the plaza, making people nearby flinch. Emily didn't move, but Max shifted slightly, his focus never leaving the group. The younger biker laughed. "Look at her," he shouted over the noise. "She doesn't even know what's going on. Probably scared out of her mind." Emily took a deep breath, her grip on Max's harness firm but gentle. She wasn't scared, she was focused. She trusted Max, and she knew his instincts were sharper than any of the biker's cruel words. What they didn't realize was that they were provoking a dog with skills they couldn't begin to understand. The scruffy biker reached out a hand, as if to touch Max. "Come on, big guy," he said mockingly. "What are you gonna do, huh? Bark at me?" Before his hand could get any closer, Max let out a low, steady growl. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make the man pause. Max's eyes locked onto him, and for the first time, the biker hesitated. There was something in Max's gaze, something powerful and unyielding, that made the man step back slightly. "Whoa, easy there," he said, trying to sound casual. But his voice wavered just enough to reveal his unease. The leader of the group, a bulky man with a leather vest, stepped in. "What's the matter, Joe?" he asked with a smirk. "You scared of a little dog?" Joe laughed nervously, trying to play it off. "Nah, I'm not scared. It's just a dog." But Max wasn't just a dog, and Emily knew it. She didn't say anything, letting the moment hang in the air. The bikers were loud and arrogant, but they didn't understand who they were dealing with. Max's growl stopped, but his body remained poised. Emily reached down and patted his head lightly. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice steady. Max's ears twitched at her words, his focus unwavering. The bikers started to lose interest, their laughter growing quieter. They didn't want to admit it, but something about the dog unsettled them. There was an energy, a presence, that they couldn't quite put their finger on. Finally, one of them shrugged and said, "Let's go." "She's not worth it." The others agreed, their bravado fading as they climbed back onto their motorcycles. The engines roared to life again, and one by one, they rode off, leaving the plaza in uneasy silence. As the sound of the motorcycles faded, Emily took another deep breath. She knelt down beside Max, running her hand along his back. "Thank you, Max," she said softly. "You're amazing." Max wagged his tail gently, his job done for now. He had protected her without a single bark or bite, simply by being who he was, a loyal, powerful, and incredibly smart dog. Together, they stood and continued their walk, leaving the plaza behind. What the bikers didn't know, what they would never understand, was that Max wasn't just a guide dog. He was a retired presidential guard canine, and his instincts and training were unmatched. Emily smiled as she walked, her hand resting on Max's harness. With him by her side, she knew she could face anything. The bikers weren't done. Their laughter echoed in the open plaza, loud and cruel, as if they enjoyed seeing who they could scare or upset. One of them revved his motorcycle engine again, the noise sharp and jarring. The sound roared louder as he crept closer, his bike inching forward toward Emily and Max. "Bet your dog can't do anything if I come a little closer," the man shouted. His voice was cocky and full of mockery. He leaned forward on his bike, as if daring Max to react. Emily didn't flinch. She tightened her grip on Max's harness but stayed calm. The words might have been meant to scare her, but she had faced her share of challenges before. She knew better than to panic. Max, by her side, let out a low, deep growl, a sound that rumbled from deep in his chest. It wasn't loud, but it carried weight, a warning that even the biker couldn't ignore. The biker's confident grin faltered for a moment. He hadn't expected that sound. But he quickly shrugged it off, waving a hand as if the growl meant nothing. "Oh, what's that?" he said, laughing nervously. "You think your mud is scary?" Emily leaned down slightly, her voice calm and steady. "Steady, boy," she whispered softly to Max. She gave the harness a small, reassuring squeeze, a silent signal between them. Max's growl quieted, but his body remained tense, his muscles coiled like a spring ready to release. The other bikers found this even funnier. One of them pointed and sneered, "Looks like your dog thinks he's a tough guy. What's he going to do, bark us to death?" Their laughter grew louder, but Emily stayed quiet. She didn't rise to their taunts. Instead, she stood still, calm and composed. What the bikers didn't realize was that Max's quiet demeanor wasn't weakness. It was control. Max was no ordinary dog, and Emily trusted him completely. She knew that behind his steady posture and silent strength lay a set of skills that far outmatched their bravado. Max shifted slightly, moving in front of Emily. It was subtle, but purposeful. He placed himself directly between her and the bikers, his stance protective. His sharp eyes were locked on the men, watching every movement. His instincts told him something wasn't right, and he was ready to act if necessary. The bikers didn't notice the shift. To them, Max was just a guide dog, a well-trained, harmless companion. One of them leaned down from his bike, pointing a finger toward Max. "Come here, boy," he said mockingly, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "You gonna protect her? You think you're some kind of hero?" The man reached out a hand, inching it closer as if to pat Max on the head. That was when Max moved. It wasn't sudden or aggressive, but it was precise. In a single, smooth motion, he stepped forward, blocking the man's hand from getting any closer to Emily. His eyes stayed locked on the man, his posture calm but firm. There was no barking, no snapping, just a silent message that spoke louder than words. The biker froze. For a brief moment, he seemed to sense something different about Max. There was something in the way the dog moved, something controlled and deliberate, that made him hesitate. But he quickly shook it off, pulling his hand back. "Oh, come on," he said, trying to laugh it off. "What's the big deal? It's just a dog." The leader of the group, a taller man with a thick beard, rolled his eyes. "Quit messing around," he said. "She's just some blind lady. What's she gonna do? Let's go find something fun." But another biker, the youngest of the group, wasn't ready to let it go. He revved his engine again, sending a loud roar echoing across the plaza. "I wanna see if this dog is as tough as she thinks he is," he shouted. He laughed as he inched his bike even closer to Max, the front tire almost touching the dog's paws. Max didn't move back. Instead, he held his ground, his posture steady and alert. His eyes never left the biker, and for a moment, it felt like time had stopped. Emily could sense Max's focus. She could feel his readiness, the way his body tensed, waiting for her signal. "Max," she said softly, her voice steady. It was all she needed to say. Max understood her perfectly, and his body relaxed just slightly. He was still on high alert, but he trusted Emily's calm command. The younger biker didn't see the shift. He leaned forward, smirking. "See? Nothing's gonna happen. He's just a..." Before he could finish, the leader cut him off. "Leave it," he said sharply. There was a note of caution in his voice now, a hint that even he wasn't sure about pushing any further. "Let's not waste time here. It's not worth it." The younger man hesitated, clearly wanting to argue, but he eventually backed off. He revved his engine one last time and turned his bike away from Emily and Max. The group began to gather, preparing to leave. But before they rode off, one of them looked back at Emily and called out, "You got lucky today, lady. Next time, maybe leave the dog at home." Emily didn't respond. She simply stood there, her hand resting lightly on Max's harness. She felt the tension in his body slowly fade as the bikers rode away, their loud engines growing quieter in the distance. As the plaza returned to its peaceful state, Emily knelt down beside Max. She placed a hand gently on his head, her touch full of gratitude. "You did good, Max," she said softly. "You always do." Max wagged his tail slightly, his sharp eyes scanning the area one last time before he relaxed. Emily smiled, knowing that Max's quiet strength had once again kept her safe. What the bikers didn't know, what they could never understand, was that Max wasn't just a guide dog. He was a retired Presidential Guard canine, trained to protect, defend, and act with unmatched precision. As Emily stood and continued her walk, she felt a deep sense of pride and security. With Max by her side, she knew she could face anything the world threw her way. Max wasn't just her guide, he was her guardian, her partner, and her hero. The leader of the bikers, a tall man with a thick beard and a leather vest, was getting frustrated. He didn't like being ignored, and Emily's calm demeanor seemed to annoy him even more. He puffed out his chest and stepped closer to Max. "What's the deal with this dog, huh?" he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "You think he's gonna protect you from us? He's just a guide dog." Emily didn't answer, her grip on Max's harness steady. Her silence seemed to fuel his arrogance. "Let me see that harness," the man said, reaching out toward Max. His fingers were inches away when everything changed. In a blur of motion, Max sprang into action. His bark cut through the air like a whip, sharp, loud, and commanding. The lead biker froze, startled by the sound, but Max didn't stop there. With the precision of someone who had been trained for situations far more dangerous, Max shifted his body and pivoted just enough to knock the man off balance. The biker stumbled back, his arms flailing as he tried to steady himself. Emily stood tall, her calm presence suddenly commanding. Her voice was steady and strong as she spoke. "You really shouldn't mess with us," she said, her tone carrying a quiet power that made the other bikers pause. "Max isn't just my guide dog. He's a retired canine from the Presidential Guard. And trust me, he's been trained to handle threats far bigger than you." The plaza fell silent. The bikers, who had been so loud and confident just moments ago, now exchanged nervous glances. Their laughter had vanished, replaced by uneasy silence. Max stood in front of Emily, his posture firm and poised. He didn't bark again, but he didn't need to. His presence was enough. The lead biker, still trying to recover from the shock, looked at Max with wide eyes. "A canine? Like, a police dog?" he stammered. His voice was less certain now, the bravado fading fast. "Not just a police dog," Emily replied, her voice calm but firm. "Max was part of the Presidential Guard. He's protected some of the most important people in the world. And he's been trained to deal with situations much worse than this." The bikers looked at each other, their confidence crumbling. One of them, a younger man with a nervous laugh, tried to lighten the mood. "We didn't mean any harm," he said quickly. "We were just joking around, right, guys?" But no one laughed. Max took a step forward, his sharp eyes watching their every move. His body language was clear, he was in control. The leader of the group backed up another step, his hands raised slightly as if to show he wasn't a threat. Okay, he muttered. "We get it. We'll leave." Another biker, who had been quiet until now, whispered, "Man, I told you we shouldn't mess with her. Look at that dog." Max let out another bark, short and sharp, and the sound sent the group scrambling. They climbed onto their bikes, their earlier arrogance completely gone. Engines roared to life as they fumbled to get away as quickly as possible. One biker nearly dropped his helmet in his rush to leave. As the last of the motorcycles sped off, the plaza grew quiet again. Emily let out a slow breath, her hand resting gently on Max's head. "Good boy," she said softly. Max wagged his tail slightly, his sharp eyes still scanning the area for any lingering danger. The few people who had been watching from a distance began to clap, their applause echoing in the plaza. A woman stepped forward, her voice filled with awe. "That was incredible," she said. "I've never seen a dog like that." Emily smiled, patting Max's head. "He's one of a kind," she said. "And he's always watching out for me." The woman nodded, her eyes wide. I didn't know guide dogs could do that. They usually don't, Emily replied, a small smile playing on her lips. Max isn't just any guide dog. He's a hero. Max seemed to relax now that the bikers were gone. His ears perked up at the sound of Emily's voice, and his tail wagged a little more. He stayed close to her side, his protective instincts still sharp but his posture less tense. Emily could feel the strength and loyalty in every movement he made, and she knew just how lucky she was to have him. As Emily and Max walked away from the plaza, she couldn't help but reflect on the moment. She had always known Max was special, but seeing him in action reminded her of just how extraordinary he really was. Max wasn't just a guide dog, he was a partner, a protector, and a friend who would stand by her no matter what. The bikers had underestimated them, but they had learned their lesson. And Emily, with Max by her side, knew she could face anything that came her way. Together, they were unstoppable. As the bikers revved their engines and sped off, the plaza slowly came back to life. People who had been watching from a distance began to step closer. Their faces showed a mix of relief and admiration. A ripple of applause broke out among the bystanders, starting with one older man who clapped slowly and steadily until others joined in. The sound grew louder, filling the air with cheers and claps. Emily smiled softly, reaching down to pat Max on the head. "Good boy," she murmured, her voice warm and full of gratitude. Max, ever watchful, finally allowed himself to relax. His tense posture softened, and his tail wagged gently, a sign that he, too, felt the situation was under control now. A young boy with wide eyes and messy hair ran up to Emily. "Wow," he exclaimed, pointing at Max. "Your dog is so cool. Is he really a hero dog?" Emily chuckled and nodded. "Yes, he is," she said. "He's trained to protect me and make sure I'm safe. He's my best friend." The boy's mother quickly came up behind him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry," she said to Emily. "He's just so excited." "That was amazing. Your dog is incredible." Emily gave the woman a kind smile. "It's okay. Max is used to a little attention." Meanwhile, Max's sharp ears twitched. Even though he was relaxed, he was still aware of everything happening around him. He glanced toward the direction where the bikers had fled, his sharp gaze making sure there was no remaining threat. It wasn't long before the sound of sirens reached the plaza. A few police cars pulled up, lights flashing brightly. The crowd parted to let the officers through. A tall officer with a kind but serious face stepped out of the lead car and approached Emily. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat slightly, "are you okay? We got a report about some bikers causing trouble." Emily nodded calmly. "I'm fine, thanks to Max," she said, gesturing to the dog by her side. "He made sure nothing happened." One of the bystanders, an elderly woman with a red scarf, spoke up. "It was amazing. That dog scared those bikers off like they were little kids. You should have seen it." The officer raised an eyebrow, looking down at Max with newfound respect. "Well, it sounds like you've got quite the partner here," he said. Just as he was about to ask more questions, a second officer approached, holding a radio. "We've got them, sir," he said. "The bikers didn't get far. We intercepted them at the next intersection. Witnesses say they were driving recklessly." The first officer nodded, then turned back to Emily. "Looks like we've got this under control. But I'd like to get a statement from you if you don't mind." Emily agreed, speaking calmly and clearly as she explained what had happened. She described how the bikers had harassed her, how Max had stepped in, and how the situation unfolded. Her voice was steady, a sharp contrast to the chaos the bikers had caused. As she spoke, Max stayed by her side, his tail wagging slightly whenever she touched his head. The officers couldn't help but glance at him with admiration. After Emily finished her statement, The officer said, "Thank you, ma'am. We'll make sure these guys face the consequences. It sounds like they've been causing trouble all over town, but they picked the wrong person to mess with today." The officer smiled down at Max. "And they definitely picked the wrong dog." Another officer approached Emily with a soft smile. "You and Max are a great team," she said. "It's not every day we see a dog like him. You're lucky to have him." Emily's smile widened as she placed a hand on Max's back. "I am," she said. "Max is more than just a guide dog. He's my protector." As the officers prepared to leave, the crowd around Emily began to disperse. People returned to their daily routines, but not before giving her and Max admiring glances. A few even stopped to thank her for standing up to the bikers. One man, who had been sitting quietly on a nearby bench during the incident, approached her. He was wearing a simple brown jacket